the announcement of the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun in 1922 by Howard Carter. And I have to say, as editor of the journal, I, in a previous incarnation, was an editor for Archaeology Magazine, and I was working with Bob back in the days when he was like mummifying. He like went to like Natron and got all of the mummy juice and all that sort of stuff. And actually there were some, I don't know if they were willing or late unwilling or willing participants, and he did all of that. But Bob is probably one of the most well-versed people on mummification, the description of Egypt, for those of you who saw it, maybe up in our upstairs on the 5th floor, and has written a number of books. And his current book, The Tomb That Changed the World, was preceded by a fabulous volume called The Murder of Tutankhamen, which went into all the forensics and all of that sort of stuff. And when we knew the anniversary of the discovery was imminent, of course, I rung up Bob, a member of the club for many, many years, and I said, "What can you do?" And he said, "Well, I have a story for you." And naturally, what could we say but, of course. And so for those of you who are members, you'll be getting this in the mail. For those of you who are not members, you can acquire it for a couple of dollars downstairs. And with no further ado, I would love to welcome one of my favorite Egyptologists, Bob Brier.
Thank you. If anybody needs seats, there are 2 up here, in case anybody needs a seat. Let me explain something about this book that Angela was talking about. As she said, it's the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the tomb. Can you hear me in the back? Let me see a hand up if you can. Yeah, good. Okay, good. We're good. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit because I'm taller than Angela. Okay. As Angela was saying, it's the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the tomb, and it depends on what day you want to call the discovery. November 4th is when they find the first step leading down to the tomb, and 100 years ago today is when they break through the wall and they get to see wonderful things. So for a whole year, you'll have all kinds of 100th anniversaries. And I was asked to do a book for Oxford University Press for the 100th anniversary. And this is the book I did, but it's not the book I intended to do, right? So I thought it'd be interesting to show you how things don't always work out the way you think they are when I started doing this book. Now, one thing that stayed the same, let me see, how do I advance the slides? I haven't looked this yet. Let's see. It's got to be this little thing. What do you think? No? Let's see. Anybody know? Alex here? Green one, huh? Okay, let's try it. No, that's the pointer. You can't fool me. I'm a PhD. There you go. There you go. Whoops. Dropped the green one. Anyway. The one thing that stayed the same, the way I thought it would, was the story of the discovery. Now, as Angela mentioned, the discoverer is Howard Carter. He is the one on the left, right? He is an impoverished archaeologist, which may be redundant, but he is. And on the right is Lord Carnarvon. Right? They are the team that is going to search for years for the tomb of Tutankhamun. Carnarvon is an interesting man. He's a sportsman. He was a sportsman. He loved fast cars, racing horses, hunting, and he was involved in one of the earliest automobile accidents ever. Right? He flipped his car, injured himself severely, and went to Egypt to recover. And he fell in love with the country. And he thought it would be a nice idea to excavate. And those were the days when if you had a little bit of money and you could find yourself an archaeologist, you could excavate. And the deal was you get to keep half of what you find. That was the deal with the Egyptian Antiquity Service. So these 2 team up, and they're going to excavate in Egypt. They excavate together for 5 years, and they find very little, very little. But Carter is really smart. He is experienced in excavating. He was the inspector for Luxor, for the area where the Valley of the Kings is. He knew the area very well, and he knew that Tutankhamun was missing. Tutankhamun at this point is a very, very little-known pharaoh. Just a few objects with his name had been found. Nobody was even sure where he came in the 18th dynasty, who his father was. But Carter was pretty sure that he was in the Valley of the Kings. He had 2 clues. At the time they teamed up, there was a wealthy American excavating in the Valley of the Kings who had the concession, the permission to excavate in the valley, Theodore Davis. Davis found two things that were of interest. One is, under a rock, he found a small cup, a faience cup, a ceramic cup, with Tutankhamun's name on it, right? So associating Tut with the Valley of the Kings. The other was, Davis found a pit burial, and in the pit were vases for wine, mummy bandages, bones from a meal, and floral collars, pectorals, and they all had the name of Tutankhamun on it. Davis was convinced he had found the plundered tomb of Tutankhamun. And he published a book calling it The Tomb of Tutankhamun. And then he said in that book, I fear the Valley of the Kings is now played out. And he gave up the concession. Carter jumped on it, right? So now Carter and Carnarvon are searching specifically for the tomb of Tutankhamun. Right? It's no luck. They know what they're doing. Now, with my greater knowledge of this object, I can... Now, I want to explain why Tut's tomb disappears. There had never been a pharaoh's tomb found in the Valley of the Kings intact. All had been robbed in antiquity, but not Tut's. Now, this is a painting done in 1838 by David Roberts, and it shows the valley as it was. These are tombs. There are about 14 or 15 tombs open. You could see them. And this is the tomb of Ramses VI. Now, Ramses VI comes after Tut. He's more than 100 years after Tut. And when they're excavating his tomb, the workers, they don't want to carry the rubble any further than they have to. So they dump it here, on top of Tutankhamun's tomb. This is where Tut's tomb was, right? In ancient times, right there. So they're carrying out the rubble, and they dump it. Carrying out the rubble, and they dump it. And Tut's tomb disappears for 2,000 years, right? Now, let me show you. This is an actual photo, 1925, of the Valley of the Kings, and that's the tomb. That's the tomb of Ramses VI that I was showing you, and that's Tutankhamun's tomb, right there. So the rubble comes here, and they dump it here, and this disappears, right? So that's why it disappeared. So on November 4th, 1922, they discover a step. There will be 16 leading down to that tomb, right? They wait for Lord Carnarvon to come. Lord Carnarvon was in England at Highclere Castle, which you know better as Downton Abbey, right? That's filmed at Highclere Castle, Lord Carnarvon's castle. And they wait for Carnarvon to come, and then about 100 years to the day, they break through the wall. There's a plastered wall, and behind it is going to be the tomb. Nobody knows what's behind it. They're not sure. Carter makes a small hole in the wall. He's got his candle. He's looking in. You know, the candle flickers because there's hot air coming out of the tomb, right? And Carnarvon says, can you see anything? And Carter says, wonderful things, right? And that's the famous line, and that's the wonderful things that he could see. That's what Carter could see through the hole in the wall. Now, the reason it's chock-a-block with things, wonderful things, is that the Egyptian religion was one of resurrection. They believed that you were literally going to get up and go again in the next world. That's why they mummified. You had to preserve the body. You're going to need it to resurrect. And the next world is kind of going to be like this world, right? That's how they envisioned it. We have tomb paintings showing the next world, and it looks pretty good. It's kind of like this world, only it's air-conditioned. That's what it looks like. Everybody's kind of in their very fine white linen, you know, they're doing fine. And this is why Tut is trying to take it all with him. He's taking stuff with him. So, for example, what we have here, whoops, sorry. Right? Can I go back? Let's see. Yes, look at that. I'm doing it. Right? One more. One more. Come on. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. I'll try not to mess up. This is a funeral couch. This was used in a ritual at the time of burial, right? There were various rituals performed on the mummy, and it's high. You can see it's pretty high, and the idea is that the priest won't have to bend down on an ordinary couch, so it's right up there at chest level. And that's one of them. There's three. That's the tail of the next couch, and you can see the hippopotamus-headed one over there. So he's got three ritual couches. Now, under here, right, these are ducks. They're ducks in little wooden containers, right? It's Tutankhamun's order to go, right? It's his meal for the next world. And so, so you can kind of view these like the equivalent of the Chinese styrofoam containers, and he's got the ducks in there. So the tomb is chock-a-block with all kinds of things, right? It's going to take them 10 years to excavate the tomb. There's so many things in there. They're fragile. Many of them are fragile. And Carter is a really good excavator. He puts together a team. He knows that he can't do it by himself. He's going to need a team, and he puts together an all-star team. The Metropolitan Museum of Art loans him their great photographer, Harry Burton, who took this photo and hundreds of others, right? And Carter's idea is to photograph everything in situ, as it is, so they could almost reconstruct the burial of Tutankhamun. So nothing's going to be moved until it's photographed, right? And often, it took, well, for example, I'll give you an example. This chest, it contains clothes and linens, right? And sometimes they're fragile. So what you've got to do is they will open the chest. Lucas comes and photographs the top layer. And then their chemist on the team, Alfred Lucas, who's a specialist in conservation and ancient Egyptian objects, Lucas pours wax over the top, because that's reversible. You just heat it and it'll go. And then you can lift it up without tearing it and breaking it. And then they move the object. Burton's called in, photograph the next layer, right? Lucas is called in, repeat, right? So it's a long, tedious process, but they're doing it right, right? Now, I thought for my book, for this book, here was my simplistic plan. I wanted to do something that people hadn't heard about, and I thought the best thing I could do is to talk about new research with Tutankhamun. Most people think 1922 it's discovered, by 1930 everything's out of the tomb, and it's moved to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo at Tahrir Square. Then it's put into glass cases, everybody comes and looks at it, and that's the end of the story. But it's not. There's a lot of research that's been going on with Tutankhamun for quite a while. And I thought I would survey the research and tell people, what's going on. But things don't always work out that way. It just didn't happen. Let me show you why. Now, first, my specialty, as Angela was saying, my specialty is mummies. So I knew I would do a survey of all the research done on Tutankhamun's mummy, right? I knew I wanted to do that. And I kind of thought, I knew which way it was going to go. You may have heard that Tutankhamun had a club foot. He was very fragile and walked on the side of his foot even. That's because of this book. This is new research called Scanning the Pharaohs. And what they did was they CAT scanned all the royal mummies from the Valley of the Kings, right? CAT scans are much more accurate, give you better resolution than X-rays, right? So this is really top of the line, the best you can do. And they brought out this book on the Scanning the Pharaohs. And one of the things, this is 2016. And one of the things they said in there was that we discovered that Tutankhamun had a club foot. And he may have walked on the side of his foot. So that was the story that everybody told about Tutankhamun. But when I started doing this book, my book, I looked at the CAT scan and I didn't see a club foot. And then I started doing search of the literature to see what other people said. And I noticed that an orthopedic surgeon had written in, he didn't see a club foot. And I was kind of curious, what's going on? And then I started to really think about what's happened with this mummy. And I realized something is not right. I just, in the middle of the night, Miss Clavel said, now, one of the things they said in that book was that because Tutankhamun was infirm, he needed support when he walked. That's why he had almost 100 walking sticks and canes. Right? That makes sense. If you have a club foot, you need support. And this is one of them, by the way. It's a really zippy one. If you can make out it at the top, that's a Nubian, one of the enemies, one of the 9 traditional enemies of Egypt. So when Tut walked, he would have this Nubian in his hand, squishing him. Also, by the way, on the bottom of some of his sandals, there were pictures of Nubians and Syrians, so whenever he walked, he's stepping on the enemy, right? So the idea was that he had all these canes and walking sticks because he was infirm. Now, it sounds reasonable, but it's wrong. Officials in ancient Egypt had loads of walking sticks and canes. It was a sign of authority. We often see reliefs of officials holding a staff of authority, so that didn't mean that he was infirm. But the thing that really didn't ring true was what I knew about his mummy. Let me show you. Now, we are looking at the innermost coffin, Tut was buried with 3 nested coffins, 2 wood, 1 solid gold. The innermost was solid gold, right? 320 pounds of gold. That's what we're looking at. The reason for the gold coffin is that gold was the metal of immortality. It doesn't tarnish. And for example, the burial chamber was called the gold room. And if you wanted to make sure that your body was protected, you had little finger stalls of gold, right? And Tutankhamun is wearing gold sandals, right? I'll show them to you in a minute. And that is the famous gold mask. It's still on him. Now, the reason it's still on him, they've unwrapped Tut. The bandages were decayed, and they cut them off, and there were many layers of bandages with jewelry in it. But they've still got him in the coffin, and the reason is he's stuck there. When they buried him, as part of the ritual, they poured about 8 gallons of sacred oils on the mummy. Over the thousands of years, the oils have congealed, and Tut is stuck to the gold coffin. They tried all kinds of things to get him out. They took the gold coffin out of the tomb, into the valley, and let it in the sun for a day, hoping the sun would warm it, and no, didn't work. Eventually, they had to take the gold mask off with heated knives to pry it loose, right? Doing damage to the mummy as they're going along, right? And here's where I say things didn't seem to make sense. The anatomist, there was an anatomist from Kasserolini Hospital named Dr. Douglas Derry, a good anatomist. He knew his stuff. He wasn't good with mummies. He ripped Tut apart. He wasn't very careful with it. But he would know what a club foot was. And he took those gold sandals off of Tutankhamun, and he didn't see any club foot. Let me show you the sandals. They're kind of neat. There. Those are the gold sandals. Aren't they great? Sometimes it's good to be king. What they imitate are real sandals, which are made out of reeds, which are tied together and then sewn around the borders, right? So they're imitating regular sandals. Now, another thing that didn't sound right to me, and I wanted to find out, and this is where new research comes in. If Tut really walked on the side of his foot, wouldn't his shoes show that wear? They'd be asymmetrical. One would be really worn, and the other would be relatively better condition. Well, he was buried with about 24 pairs of shoes and sandals. And I asked the expert in leather on it, Andre Veldemir, I said, any sign of wear asymmetrically? He said, no, they're both the same. Left and right are the same. So again, it doesn't make sense that he walked on the side of his foot. It really doesn't. Now, this is Tutankhamun after they finally got him out of the coffin, and they've reassembled him on a sand tray. And I think you can see, oops, sorry, one back. Come on. I'm going to get it, I think. Yeah, no, wait. My goodness, wait. There's going to be a test after this. There. I think you can see that pretty symmetrical, but more important, these bones here, right, the lower leg, is made up of the tibia and fibula, right? They would be affected if you had a club foot. Those bones would be, one bone would be deformed. No signs of it. Tut was x-rayed in the 1980s by R.G. Harrison, a really good radiologist. He didn't see any club foot either. So, I am convinced that Tut did not have a club foot. As a matter of fact, I called up the radiologist who published the book in which it says he had a club foot and walked on the side of his foot. I know her well. She's a friend. And I said, Sahar, I'm looking at the x-rays, the scans, and I don't see a club foot. Do you think he walked on the side of his foot? And she just said, no, he didn't walk on the side of his foot. I think what happened was there were many people involved in this project of scanning the pharaohs, and somebody thought he looked like a club foot, and they gave it to him. So, well, yeah, we'll put it in, that kind of thing. So I think it was a kind of committee thing. But he didn't walk on the side of his foot. There's no way. So, given that he's a healthy, normal person, what was his life like? Could he have been on the opposite spectrum, rather than the fragile pharaoh, Could he have been a warrior? Could he have gone to battle? Right? And that's why I say things don't always turn out the way you think they do. So, evidence that he was a warrior. Some of you may know what this is. This is the Avenue of Sphinxes. It's an avenue of sphinxes that goes for 1.5 miles. It connects Luxor Temple with Karnak Temple, the two largest religious centers on the east bank of the Nile at Luxor. This was used for processions by the priests. Every year, they would take the statues of the gods and walk them from Karnak to Luxor, have festivals, and then walk them back through this processional. They would have granite blocks where they would rest the statues for a while, the people could see them, that kind of thing. So about 15 years ago, the Antiquity Service decided it would be really neat if we could restore this processional so tourists could actually walk from Karnak to Luxor, Luxor to Karnak, the way the priests did. Now, this involved taking down lots of houses, because houses had been built over the processional, fills in over the thousands of years. And they did. They bought the houses, they eventually took them down, and what they discovered was that many of the houses, the older houses, their foundations were built out of blocks taken from the temples. So you had ancient Egyptian blocks at the bottom of many of these houses, some medieval times even, some were from medieval times. There were about 2,000 blocks. There is a group called Chicago House, a group of Egyptologists working in Luxor, whose job it is not to excavate, but to copy. They are afraid that the temples will be destroyed over the hundreds of years, and they want to make perfect copies of it. So these guys have two qualities. They are Egyptologists, and they're artists. So they draw the walls, they photograph the walls, but they also know what's there. They understand it. So they can translate the hieroglyphs, and if something's broken, they know what's missing, right? So these guys looked at these 2,000 blocks, especially one, Ray Johnson, and they put some of the blocks back in the temple. They knew where they belonged. So they built up the walls again, which was great. But Ray found about 200 blocks that didn't fit with the other ones. It was a different art style. It was different kind of carvings. And he took the 200 blocks and tried to figure out what it was. And then he realized it's from Tutankhamun. They had Tutankhamun's name on them, and they showed him as a warrior. Right? Now, let me show you one of the blocks. It'll take you a second to get used to it, but you'll see it. Look at it for a minute. This is a close-up of one of the blocks. The blocks are about this big. Right? Whoops, not this big. In the center is a cage, and that's a Syrian prisoner. We can tell from his garment, his beard, the way he's, right? Tutankhamun is bringing him back on his ship as a war trophy in a cage hanging from the mast, right? So at least Tutankhamun is showing himself as a warrior, right? But let me show you another one. Now, what we are looking at here is a reconstructed scene. Ray Johnson has taken the blocks, and these are the blocks. The dark lines are the real blocks that he has. That's a little fragment, another fragment. And then he's drawn in what's missing, because from this we can figure out what's missing. So what it shows is soldiers, Egyptian soldiers, we know that because of their hairstyle and their round-top shields. That's traditional of Egyptian shields. And they've got their spears. But what's on the spears are human hands, skewered human hands. This is how the Egyptians counted the dead of their enemy. After the battle, they cut off the hand and piled them up, actually, and counted them. And Tutankhamun is showing them skewered on his soldiers' spears. Right? First time anybody's ever seen this. This has never been seen before in Egypt, only on Tutankhamun's temple. This is from Tutankhamun's temple, his mortuary temple, where he was going to be worshipped forever. Right? And they took it down, somebody took it down, reused the blocks, but now we have a reconstruction of it. So Tutankhamun is certainly showing himself as a warrior. Right? Now, that's 100 years after Tutankhamun. Somebody else has his mortuary temple, Ramses III, and what we see here is a pile of hands. That's the way they traditionally show it. So Tut has started something with his skewered hands, and it morphs into this, piles of hands, and behind it would be military scribes counting the enemy. Right? You never hear about the enemy, the Egyptians who have been killed. Never, ever do you hear of an Egyptian being killed. It's always only the enemy. This is not an accurate reporting. It's somewhat of propaganda. And what you have also, by the way, is there are numbers. Oops, sorry, I do it again. Right, let's see. There we go. There are numbers up here, and it says how many were killed. There's the thing that look like lotus flowers, those are thousands. The curl is 100. The hoops are tens, and those little strokes are ones. So it's 2,175 dead. Right? So that's a traditional battle scene at the end. Now, part of every battle, an important part in the Egyptian way of warfare, was chariots. These were the fighter jets of ancient Egypt. I mean, this was the sophisticated, really hot thing to have. And they're very, very, very complicated machines. This is not a war chariot, by the way. In Tutankhamun's tomb, he was buried with 6 chariots. 6. Before Tut, this is the only chariot we had found. Right? And that's from Tutankhamun's great-grandparents, Yuya and Tuya. It's a ceremonial chariot. It's a chariot that they would have been paraded around at festivals and things like that. And that's a drawing by Howard Carter, the discoverer of Tutankhamun's tomb. He started out as a 17-year-old artist on excavations, and he worked his way up. Right? So that's chariots, right? But Tut had 6 of them. This is a scene on Tutankhamun's painted chest. He had a nice wooden chest, and it shows him in his chariot. All right, there he is. And it's an almost impossible scene. The pharaohs always showed them this way. When they're in battle in a chariot, they never have a driver. They're always doing it all by themselves, right? The focus is on the pharaoh. And he's got the reins of the horse tied around his waist, right? So he's controlling it sort of with his waist, and he's shooting his arrow, which, oops, sorry, I did it again. Shooting his arrow, which never miss. There's the Nubians, right? They're poor Nubians. And this is a typical battle scene. Now, one thing that is typical in the battle scenes, and I wondered about this, what is it? Can you see there's a little round circle behind the horse's neck? Right? It looks like a solar disk, the sun or something like that. Always wondered, what is it? It appears all the time. This is a scene 100 years after Tutankhamun on another temple, and there it is, right? Same thing, and there's the poor Nubians always. Now, what is it? Well, let me show you. I think I've got the answer. Now, first, this is the chariot from Tutankhamun's tomb. It's a photograph by Harry Burton. It's an early color photograph, right? Early color photograph. Chariots, as I say, were very complex machines. They had 3 kinds of wood that were needed to build a chariot. You needed a strong axle, right? So you needed a really strong piece of wood for the axle. But you wanted the body to be light, so you wanted a lighter wood for the body because you want to maneuver. And then the wheels had to be made out of a kind of wood that would bend, right? So you could get a wheel. So it was really quite a difficult thing to build, and they broke all the time. We see scenes on temple walls where they show they're off to battle, but there are guys fixing the chariots, right? They broke all the time. But this is the body of one of Tutankhamun's chariots. But this is an object found in Tutankhamun's tomb. As you can see, it's a falcon, right? Horus, the god Horus, and the pharaoh is always associated with Horus. And so there's whoops, sorry, I did it again. There you go. Come on, get back there.
Just like a hood ornament?
That's exactly what it is. It's the first hood ornament in the world. Wait, let me get back. I'm trying to get it back. Hang on, I'm going to get it back. There we go. Now, if you look carefully, now first there's a solar disk. And it spells out his name, by the way. That little semicircle is Neb, and that's a beetle, a scarab beetle with wings, Khepru, Neb Khepru, and there's the solar god Re, right? So Neb Khepru Re is one of Tut's names, right? But look at the bottom. You see how it's carved out? The bottom is carved out. And the next slide shows, I have a drawing. It went on the pole that connected the chariot body with the horses. And it is a hood ornament, right? I can't wait to tell Jay Leno. I mean, it's going to be the first hood ornament in the history of the world, right? And when you see it on the temple walls, that thing behind the horse's neck is the solar disk, right? So the pharaoh always had Horus leading him into battle, right? So that's kind of neat. So at least from what we know about Tutankhamun's tomb, it looks like he could have been a warrior, and he's got a temple that shows him in battle. He's got war chariots. And there's even a little more evidence that he was a warrior. This is an item that hadn't been seen in decades, because it was in such poor condition. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to work on it. It's a suit of armor. These are like little shield-shaped leather scales. They're holes, and they were sewn onto linen and would be the protective outer casing of the armor. And André Veldemir, the leather expert who worked on this and restoring this and figuring out what it was and how it went together, he said he could tell from the pieces that it had been worn. There were signs of wear where these things rubbed against each other. So not only did Tutankhamun go to the next world with his suit of armor, he had worn it. So I think, and this is one of those examples of things don't always work out the way you think they are, where I started thinking, yeah, the fragile pharaoh, let's look at the club foot, and it didn't work out that way. And it led me to the conclusion that I think really he was probably more likely a warrior pharaoh, or at least as a teenager had gone into battle. So that's one of the things that didn't work out the way I thought it did, but that's okay. Now, one other thing I'd like to show you, that another little research angle that didn't work out also. Now, this is little Tut. This is young Tut, and it's a painting by Winifred Brunton, who was an archaeologist, painter, and she did paintings of the pharaohs. And she did a wonderful book called The Great Ones of Egypt, and it shows Tut maybe around 10 years old, 11 years old, and he's wearing this pectoral, and he's got a collar, he's got his crown on. But the important thing for us is the dagger. It's a spectacular thing. It's got a rock. Oops, I did it. No, I did it again. Let's see. Come on. There. It's got a rock crystal pommel. It's got a gold hilt. But the blade is what's important. It's iron. Now, Egypt did not have iron. Iron is very difficult to smelt. They had copper first, which is a soft metal. Then they had bronze. Bronze is much harder, and it's an amalgam of two metals, copper and tin, right? About 88% copper, 12% tin. Now, copper and tin are both soft metals, but when you combine them, you get a really hard one. It's kind of like a magic thing. Now, the reason is that the reason metals are soft is because the molecules align, they slide, and that's what makes a metal soft. So copper molecules align, tin molecules align, but when you melt them together, when you smelt them and intermingle, they form a lattice, and it's hard, and that's why bronze is hard. But they didn't have iron. Where did it come from, right? Now, I wrote a chapter about this in the book, and just to drive the ancient alien people nuts, I called the chapter, "It Came from Outer Space," right? Right? Because this is something that really did come from outer space, but when they read my chapter, they'll be terribly disappointed, I'm sure. My theory, my idea is that, and a lot of people go with this, that this was meteoritic. That's where the iron came from. It came from a meteorite. Right? It was pounded out of a meteorite. And as evidence, I have a little bit of linguistic evidence. The ancient Egyptians had a phrase for some kind of iron. They called it Bia em pet, iron from the sky. All right, so they knew. Now, one of the neat things that research that's going on, there's the daggers. They had several daggers in his tomb, but only this one is iron. Right? Really special. It was buried on his body. He had it on his body. So it shows it's extra special. Now, using Google Earth, the geologists started looking for the crater where the meteor would hit, right? And they found it. There it is. Right? It's in a very remote part of Egypt, in the southwest corner. It's so remote. Now, from the Google Earth, when they got closer, they could see that nobody had ever been there. There were no tire tracks or anything like that. And they went to the crater. They wanted to see it. It took them 4 days to get there. Right? And you're going over sand dunes. You have to go very slowly. There's no roads. And this is give you an idea of scale. There are two geologists in the crater, and all around it are fragments of meteorites, right? Of the meteorite. So, it'd be nice to say we figured it out. the dagger's iron came from the meteorite. But it didn't. Meteorites have signatures, the percent of nickel in them and things like that. And this meteorite is different from the iron, the meteoritic iron in the dagger, right? So where did the meteorite come from? Where does this come from? I think I have the answer. Tutankhamun's father was Akhenaten, the heretic king. He is the first pharaoh ever to say there is only one God. First monotheist recorded in history. He's before Moses, way before Christ, right? Monotheist. And it was so unpopular, he had to move out of Thebes and start his own city in the desert, a new religion, right? Now, in that new city, in the desert, in 1881, they found the Foreign Correspondence Office, the place that had all of the correspondence with foreign countries. And it is written on cuneiform tablets. That was the lingua franca of the ancient world. You wrote in cuneiform, wedge-shaped writing on tablets that are baked. One of the tablets says, the king of Mitanni is sending to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, that's Akhenaten's father, that's Tut's grandfather. This guy, king of Mitanni, is sending to Amenhotep III a dagger of gold with an iron blade. I think that Tut took an heirloom, grandpa's dagger, to the tomb with him. Right? So I think that's where the iron comes from. Right? I'm pretty sure. So again, it's something that didn't quite work out the way I thought it would, but it's okay. That's the way it is. Now, what I'd like to do, I'm looking at time, and we're running out of time. I'm going to wind up in 10 minutes. Let me say this. I want to say something about the legacy of Tutankhamun. What do we get from this tomb? You know, the title of my book is Tutankhamun and the Tomb That Changed the World. That's not just hype. You know, that was added on later when I realized this tomb really did change the world in 3 ways. 3 ways. The first, I think, is really maybe the most important. Maybe. It led to Egypt's independence from England. When Tutankhamun's tomb was found, Britain was controlling Egypt. It was a colonial situation, right? The tomb is found, and Carter and Carnarvon make 2 terrible decisions. Terrible, incredible, very colonial. First, they are having trouble with journalists swarming them. As soon as the tomb is discovered, journalists come from all over the world. They want pictures, they want interviews, and Carnarvon just can't handle it. He doesn't want to deal with this. So what does he do? He sells the exclusive rights to the story to the London Times. Now, journalists can't get the story. He will not talk to anybody. They will not talk to anybody else, even Egyptian journalists. This is Tut's tomb. It's in their country. He's their ancestor, and they can't get the story. The Egyptians are incensed, and you get a very strong nationalist movement with Tut as the poster boy for independence. It'll take a long time. It'll take till the 50s till Egypt is finally ruled by an Egyptian. But I think Tut plays an important role there in leading the way to independence. The second way, right, the second way I think is kind of also interesting is antiquities always used to be divided by the excavator and the antiquity service. You work for a season. At the end of the season, the excavator would take all the objects found, divide them in 2 piles, kind of like the way kids would do it. He'd divide it in 2 piles, and then the inspector from the antiquity service comes and he picks which pile he wants. So it was a good way for museums to get objects for their museums. You know, you fund an exhibition and you're going to get stuff. Carter and Carnarvon got nothing. Nothing. They were not liked. They were the outsiders. But also in their concession, it said, if any tomb is found intact in the Valley of the Kings, that stays in Egypt. And that's what happened, right? As a result of this, you know, and Carter and Carnarvon complained bitterly. They claimed we're entitled to a part of the finds, da-da-da-da. This led to Egypt saying, from now on, everything stays in Egypt. So now when the Metropolitan Museum of Art excavates in Egypt, they don't bring anything home. You're excavating for knowledge, right? That's what you're excavating for. So the laws changed about antiquities because of Tut. Okay, do you need help? Yes. Go ahead. I can look. Let's see. Well, yeah. Well, we can wrap it up for tonight. Let's see, yeah. No, I think let me just end. All right. So that's where we're going to end tonight, right? There's much more to the story, but we'll have to end it now because we have to see what we can do with this poor guy here.
You'll be outside to answer other questions.
What?
You'll be over here.
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you what I'll do. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea. What? Yeah, you think so? I'll finish. I'll finish in 5 minutes. I'll finish it, but let me 5 minutes. I'll be done. The last thing that I think we have from Tutankhamun is no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Let's do. I'll be outside. I'll sign books for you, whatever. Yeah, let's go outside.
So, do you want to thank?
I know we have sort of an unexpected situation here, but I just want to say thank you for attending and also to introduce Ann Passer because she's going to tell you all about what's happening after Thanksgiving and we have all the tryptophan
So before
poisoning.
before I do that, number one, the gentleman is going to be just fine. So everybody take a deep breath. He's okay, and that's the most important thing in the world. Again, we want to thank Angela and we want to thank Bob for an incredible lecture tonight. Please come back next Monday when we have the Honorable Margaret McEwen, who will talk on her new book called Citizen Justice about Supreme Court Justice Douglas. So we hope to see you here next week, and have a wonderful and a happy Thanksgiving. And go get a book.
Do we know who it is and what happened? He is a physician?